The biggest story, really, maybe of the year, maybe of the decade, is Monsanto. I can't tell you how many times I've sat around the table with my family talking about Monsanto, and my dad or my brother or someone will say, I swear if Monsanto isn't the evil empire of all times, I don't know what is. This sick, disgusting company we have been watching for years, suing farmers who are just trying to use organic seeds. I mean, you know all of these stories, but to finally see them have their day in court and to see how that court case went, I mean, if we're not all jumping up and down right now, then I don't know what's going to make us do it. Here's what happened in the news. Take a look.
Chemical giant Monsanto is ordered to pay more than $250 million.
Friday, a jury in San Francisco found biochemical giant Monsanto liable for former school groundskeeper Dwayne Johnson's cancer.
If you know you're going to die, you might as well not die in vain.
He'd worked as a groundskeeper for a school district in the San Francisco Bay Area. He claimed he used Monsanto's weed killer up to 30 times a year, spraying hundreds of gallons of it.
Johnson's attorneys allege the school groundskeeper was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma after using Roundup weed killer.
Now, a judge expedited the case due to the severity of his illness, and Johnson has only a few months to live.
Glad to be here to be able to help, but the cause is way bigger than me.
Dwayne Johnson's lawyer urged the jurors to hold Monsanto liable and punish them with a verdict that would, as he put it, actually change the world.
Did you find by clear and convincing evidence that Monsanto acted with malice or oppression in the conduct upon which you base your finding of liability in favor of Mr. Johnson? Answer, yes.
The jury agreed that Monsanto knew Roundup was dangerous and could cause cancer, but hid that fact from consumers.
Attorneys for Monsanto insist their product is safe, and they plan to appeal.
The verdict today does not change the science.
Court documents allege that Monsanto paid scientists to publish these studies affirming Roundup's safety.
It knew the weed killer's linked to cancer and failed to notify the public.
Does this now verdict kind of confirm the nightmare that we've always been worried about, that we are poisoning ourselves?
This case was historic. Every major known human carcinogen had a moment like this, a moment when the science finally caught up.
And I'm so glad that this jury held them accountable.
For thousands of plaintiffs, many suffering with cancer, the verdict is a beacon of hope.
I mean, a moment a lot of people thought would never come. I have actually a personal stake in this because this is a story that I covered back when the World Health Organization had first ruled that that glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to human beings. I decided I wanted to try and do that story on the Doctor's television show. I want to state that this show really gave me an opportunity to look into things like this, and a miracle happened. When we were putting that show together, I really wanted to get someone to speak from Monsanto. I'd never seen Monsanto ever appear on a television show, but I remember saying to my assistant, will you please reach out to Monsanto and see if they want to send someone onto the show to defend the fact the World Health Organization, IARC specifically, has ruled that it's probably carcinogenic to human beings, which, by the way, is the second highest carcinogenic rating there is, just short of it causes cancer. And so when we reached out, I remember, I'll never forget the moment. I'm sitting in my office and my assistant walks in and she says, Monsanto wants to send their head of toxicology to be on the show, Dr. Donna Farmer. I tell you, I remember I just about kissed that assistant and said, you do not know what a bucket list moment this is for me as a medical journalist and an investigative journalist. We ended up bringing her on, and she debated Jeffrey Smith, the GMO activist. This is just a taste of how that show went from the beginning.
Anytime you hear the word cancer associated with food, rightly so, it raises concerns.
I'm a scientist at Monsanto for 20 years, and this has been the molecule that I've studied all of those years, and I'm absolutely confident of the data behind it. And again, you're probably all saying, yeah, well, she's with Monsanto. But again, don't take my word for it, because the regulatory agencies around the world for the past 40 years, looking at very comprehensive reviews, have come to that conclusion.
We do have someone from sort of the alternative perspective.
Many scientists who reviewed their research have declared it tobacco science, catching them red-handed, specifically designing their studies to avoid finding problems.
There's different ways that we look at the data, and if we had any indication or any concerns about the safety of this product, we wouldn't be putting it out there. And I mean this very honestly, I am extremely highly confident in this product as a mom, and then I can back it up as a scientist.
So that was an incredible show. I could only show you a quick clip of it. There were literally people booing and cheering and screaming in the audience. My executive producers thought it felt like a Jerry Springer episode. I was really surprised how many people actually didn't like Monsanto and didn't believe Dr. Donna Farmer when she was speaking, but it gets better. Now last year, the doctors covered this story again with a producer that was a friend of mine, Jen Sherry. Jen Sherry decided to follow up on this because this was going into court. This is what that looked like. Take a look last year on the doctors.
Anytime you hear the word cancer associated with food,
dozens of independent, well-recognized scientists, people who didn't have any connections to Monsanto or the chemical industry, studied glyphosate over the course of a year, then ultimately decided it was a probable carcinogen. Thousands of people have come out saying, I was swimming in this stuff, and now I have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I, along with several other law firms, have now filed thousands and thousands of cases. Study after study was showing that there's a real problem here with glyphosate, and in fact, Roundup.
we want to believe that everything is safe because we have a government with an EPA and other governing bodies.
One of the things that we've disclosed in the Monsanto papers are text messages, emails between senior EPA officials and Monsanto employees.
There are studies by reputable cancer institutes that have not shown an association.
There are dozens of epidemiological studies that show, without a question, that there is a risk.
First of all, I want to thank the Doctors television show for giving me the opportunity to do stories like that, and Jennifer Sherry. I also want to say that Jen Sherry has left the Doctors, is now my executive producer of all the work we do here at the Highwire. So I also have to thank the Doctors for training two of the best investigative journalists to continue this journey to bring you the truth. And if you want to see the full episodes of those, certainly go to thedoctorstv.com and you can watch those brilliant episodes. But in that last episode, when Jen Sherry produced it, she brought on Brent Wisner, who I have with me today. First of all, congratulations on what, I mean, I imagine you've been partying for a week, or have you just been doing a lot of press?
I thought I was going to celebrate, but it's actually been a lot more work. It turns out when you take on a corporation like Monsanto, they like to bite back, and so it's been a lot of bantering in the media and trying to counteract their false information.
Right. Well, and you guys are doing an amazing job. I want to thank you. I know you and Bobby's going to be coming on in just a second. You're taking time out to spend time with us. Yeah. Everybody's reaching out to you, so it's an honor to have you here. Just very quickly, who was the plaintiff in this case, and why? What was specific about his case?
Sure. So Dwayne Lee Johnson was a groundskeeper at the Benicia School District in Northern California. And back in around 2012, he was brought in to be an integrated pest manager. And he was so proud of his job because he had a hard time, and it paid well, and the kids loved him. They made posters for him. And part of his job was to spray Roundup. And he was spraying it in the summer months when the children weren't there, but sometimes during the school year, but primarily in the summer months. And he would spray about 150 gallons in one morning.
Wow. A
lot of exposure, a lot of drift on him, those San Francisco winds. And after about 2 years, he got a rash. And the rash spread and spread and spread. And it took him a while to figure out what it was. And it turns out it's a rare and very deadly form of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that manifests in the skin. And it spread over 80% of his body. And the simple fact is the fact that he's alive today is actually a miracle.
Well, I was going to ask you, so you said in the package you did in the Doctors that you had thousands of people lining up with these cases once the science was coming out. Why was Lee's case the first one you decided to go with?
Because he's dying. That's the simple reality of it is in California, if you pass away, you no longer have the right to seek punitive damages. And so Mr. Johnson, we sat down with him and he said, let's do it. Let's take these guys on. And so we expedited his case to trial, and it became the first one to go to a jury. It was the first time all this evidence really saw the light of day in front of 12 people.
Wow, fantastic. Look, I have Robert Kennedy Jr. is taking time out to join us. Bobby, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hey, Bobby, thank you for joining us. I mean, first of all, I was just congratulating you 2 weeks ago on our win, dealing with the HHS lawsuit that we have, and now another win. Bobby, you're on a roll, man.
Well, Brent did all the work on this case, and I can't tell you how proud I am of his performance. He, law firm Baum Hedlund, which we're both associated with, got this case. Brent's been working on witnesses for 2 years, but Lee Johnson, Dwayne Johnson's attorney was Mike Miller, who is one of the great American attorneys. He has a Virginia law firm. 2 weeks before this case went to trial, before we picked a jury, Mike was injured in a terrible kite surfing accident in Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Oh. And he ended up turning to Brent, who's a 34-year-old kid, and this was really like a Cinderella story, because I don't think any attorney in America could have done better with this jury than Brent Wisner did. I have to say, usually when I'm watching a trial, I'm thinking to myself, I could do as well as that guy, but I was watching Brent the whole time thinking, I couldn't do this well. This guy is really amazing. So I think Dwayne Johnson got the best representation that he could. We really were up against a industry that has employed all of the techniques of the tobacco that were pioneered by the tobacco industry over 60 years. Big Tobacco, while it killed 1 out of every 5 of its customers who used its product as directed, was able to avoid any kind of regulatory interference because it pioneered these techniques of ghostwriting science, of compromising science, of corrupting public officials, of capturing the agencies that are supposed to protect Americans from pollution. And Monsanto really was part of the group that pioneered those techniques, and also of using ad hominem attacks. Monsanto is the same company that was making DDT and that masterminded and orchestrated the attack on Rachel Carson, the slanderous attack, then trying to personally destroy her as she died of cancer on Agent Orange. It led the attack to deny rights and deny compensation to the tens of thousands of American veterans who had been exposed in Vietnam to this, this terrible chemical. I've been suing one of Monsanto's chemicals for 35 years, PCBs, which Monsanto was the only producer of, which contaminated the Hudson River. But in more recent years, I brought a series of lawsuits against Monsanto because of the PCBs that it put in the caulking in American schools. About half the schools built between 1950 and 1977, the caulking in their window is filled with PCBs. And Monsanto knew that PCBs was carcinogenic, that it was an endocrine disruptor, and that children should never be exposed to it. And it knew that PCBs was about to be heavily regulated, if not banned. And so it ordered all of its sales forces. It said, look, we have all of this stuff in our warehouses, and we need to get rid of it. So let's sell it for caulking for schools. So this is the mentality of a very corrupt corporate culture. And of course, Roundup has become a template for that, for that anti-democratic and anti-humanistic tradition in Monsanto. And people have known for many years that it's exterminating 13 species. The monarch butterfly will probably go extinct, the iconic butterfly of America, because of the widespread use of this herbicide. And people are angry about the 200,000 Indian farmers who have committed suicide because of Monsanto, because of Roundup and Monsanto's seed business. But Monsanto has seemed up until this moment, until Brent Wisner came along, like an untouchable corporation, and nobody was able to sue it successfully in a way that really made it maybe think about changing that corporate culture. And thanks to Brent, we have them now on the ropes. We have a cascade of new cases coming into Bomb Headland. People are calling, people from all over the country with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma are calling us and saying, could I have gotten this from spraying Roundup? People who were home gardeners, people who were farmers,
You were
people
saying
who
that to
had,
me-
all kinds of exposures.
You were telling me, and we were talking about this recently because I was just thinking about the farmers and everything, and you said it's the gardeners. The gardeners is the thing. Everybody's been using this, and I do. I see it at the Home Depot. People just buying this stuff, pouring it out, having no idea how dangerous it is. I want to get to the bottom of the case, but for anybody that doesn't fully understand glyphosate on the simplest terms, just very quickly, Monsanto created, it was an industrial pipe cleaner to begin with. This stuff had this ability to attract metals and rust out of pipes, so they would put it in giant boilers and things like that, and it would just pull all the rust out of the pipes and clean them out. That's what this product glyphosate was really good at. Then all of a sudden someone spilled it on the ground, and suddenly it killed everything in sight, and they said, whoa, hey, let's turn it into an herbicide. It kills everything in sight. And to be clear, when we say genetically modified plants or food, usually what that means is it's glyphosate resistant. So now that we had a product that killed everything in sight, they went about trying to genetically modify corn and soybeans and things so that when you put this deadly toxic poison on them, they didn't die. And so really, when we have a complaint about genetically modified food, it's usually because it's been modified to be able to withstand a deadly poison so that all the weeds and everything else around it dies. Of course, now that's even starting to, just like antibiotics or anything else, it's losing its ability to work, and they're adding even more and more toxic products. But that's what's at the heart of this for anyone that's brand new to this discussion. But I want to get into the case, Bobby. We're going to sort of go through some of the things that I don't think anyone, when we talk, Brent, about, we all hear there was these emails and everything behind the scenes. I want to go through some of these emails and what importance they had and how they worked in the case. So beginning with Dr. Donna Farmer, who I had on the show, you have this internal email where she says, the terms glyphosate and Roundup cannot be used interchangeably, nor can you use Roundup for all glyphosate-based herbicides anymore. For example, you cannot say that Roundup is not a carcinogen. We have not done the necessary testing on the formulation to make that statement, Brent. I mean, essentially, she's saying the exact opposite of what she did on primetime television on the show that I produced.
I mean, it's Monsanto's MO, right? So when they publicly say things like, oh, it's safe enough to drink, you can take a bath in it. We've heard so many people say that that's what they've heard. Internally, they're saying, we actually can't say it doesn't cause cancer because we actually haven't tested it. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand, is that Roundup is not just glyphosate. It's glyphosate plus a bunch of other chemicals. And those chemicals with glyphosate act synergistically to cause cancer and to cause genetic damage. And it's really funny, you'll find this kind of amusing. We tried to get Donna Farmer to come testify at the trial. We subpoenaed her, and actually she tried to evade service for quite a while.
Really?
Yeah, she was going in the back door of her house, and we had someone following her to try to serve her. We finally served her, and she finally came out, and she said, okay, I'll take service. And Monsanto fought tooth and nail to prevent her from testifying in front of the jury, because they knew that if I had her live in front of a jury, and I had all the documents that I had, I would have eviscerated her on the stand. But they actually went to the Missouri Supreme Court. And the Missouri Supreme Court said, no, you can't do this. You can't summon someone from another state into California.
Really?
So it's an interesting sort of legal twist. But Donna Farmer, to this day, has not yet answered questions from me, although that should be changing in the next month or so.
Bobby, what did you think of the fact that we see this flip-flop in science? I mean, is this something you're used to seeing? You've been an environmental lawyer for, 30-something years now. What do you think of the fact that this is their lead toxicologist, correct? And we see her, we've got her on camera and and now in emails telling two different stories.
Well, just to finish the story that you began earlier, Monsanto got in trouble because of two things. One, the science hit an inflection point where there now is enough science, as Brent has pointed out. There are 6 very strong epidemiological studies that show it causes cancer in humans, and then there's probably 20 animal studies that led IARC, the blue ribbon panel that is the gold standard for a gold medal standard for determining carcinogens. It led that panel to say it is a certain animal carcinogen and a probably human carcinogen. But another thing happened that was really the result of Monsanto's overreaching, which is around 2005, Monsanto began a campaign to market a new application for Roundup. Because as you said before, what they normally did is they told farmers, you can saturate the landscapes before planting or right after planting with this stuff, and it will kill everything except for the Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready soybeans, oats, wheat, etc. In 2005, it began marketing an off-label use. In other words, it was telling farmers, you not only can spray this before planting, but right before harvest, if you spray it on the crops, you can dry them out. It will act as a desiccant, and it will make them much easier to harvest. So for the first time, farmers began spraying it directly on food, and it dramatically increased the amount of glyphosate and Roundup in the environment. In fact, in the last 5 years, 70% of the Roundup that has ever been used has been used in the last 5 years. So it started appearing not just on early crop production, but in our breakfast cereal, on candy bars, in our drinking water, in our on animals and plants and the meat and the food that we eat, and even in vaccines, as you know. So it's now all around us, and there's a lot more scientific interest in it, and a lot of people are now studying it. And what they're finding is we now have passed the inflection point where courts are saying, yes, there is enough science to allow this to go in front of a jury on the issue of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But in the pipeline, right on the horizon, there's also non-alcoholic fatty liver cancer, which is now epidemic, particularly among children. For the first time in history, we're seeing 10-year-old kids with liver cancer, with liver disease. There's brain tumors that have been associated with glyphosate. It is an endocrine disruptor. We know that hurts children in their learning capacity and interferes with their sexual development. It's a chelator that robs the important minerals from the bodies of our children, and it destroys the microbiome, which means that it causes inflammation in the brain. So there's all of these other constellation of other illnesses that are lingering on, that are raising on the horizon and headed toward this. I think, Bayer, which just bought Monsanto, saw a stock drop of 14%. It lost $12 billion in value in one day, thanks to Brent's verdict. And I think the headache that Bayer got from this purchase is not going to be cured just by aspirin. It is going to be a persistent migraine for them that really is going to threaten the profitability of that company.
I'm happy to hear it, to be totally honest. I want to and we're going to get more into the case, but I do want to say, because you brought it up, I mean, this stuff is everywhere. And that's what's so terrifying about this is, normally I watch a case and go, oh, good, a coal miner or something. I don't work in a coal mine, but thank God something's being done there. This is something where this man is spraying this all over every soccer field and baseball field and football field these kids are rolling in. In fact, every one of our kids is playing in parks and rolling around in this stuff. So I think about what is the implication of that? And then you think about the food, as we're saying, I question whether, this new wheat intolerance everybody seems to have is just simply a glyphosate allergic reaction, because our wheat, as we now know, is being dried by this deadly, toxic poison. And lastly, are you aware that we have had, I think it's 2 independent studies of our vaccines that are being given to children, and we're finding glyphosate in the vaccines?
The simple fact is the volume with which Roundup is being sprayed and glyphosate is being sprayed is at a rate that the world has never seen a chemical so pervasively used, right? So we actually showed this to the jury at trial, that the rate at which it's increased is just so monumental that the volume being sprayed, I think if you were to spray it all across the United States, it's about 1 gallon per acre on the United States.
Wow.
Every year.
Wow.
It's everywhere.
Wow.
And we don't even know how to study something that's so pervasive, because when you study something, you try to compare people who are exposed to people who are unexposed. But who the heck is unexposed? I mean, everyone's getting in their food. They're getting it in their, it's in mother's breast milk. It's at the beginning of life and at the end of life. And the really creepy thing is there's a lot of studies coming out, cutting edge stuff, showing epigenetics, showing that there's damage that occurs to a parent, but you don't see the results of that damage until a generation or two afterwards.
Passing it on.
So who knows what's going to happen to the children?
It's incredible. And just very quickly, I thought it was ironic, and I know vaccines is not really your issue, but because we talk about it a lot,
sure.
You know, it's fascinating because we are finding it now in vaccines, and specifically MMR vaccine, I think was like 3.8 parts per billion. It's huge numbers.
Yeah.
And what I find ironic is when Donna Farmer was on our show, the point she brought up was, well, IARC was looking at the fact that they were injecting this stuff and not how it's really used. Here's actually that clip. Take a look at this clip.
They actually injected the Roundup formulation into the abdomen of the animals, and they did have an effect. But that's not a relevant route of exposure for somebody who's going to be spraying that herbicide. IARC only looks and says, oh, if I inject it, there's a hazard.
I mean, injecting is a totally different story. And now we find out our entire vaccine program is injecting this into our kids. But look, we could go on and all, and I know you guys got to get to it. So let's just run through some of the really crazy stuff that came up in this case. Sure. Tell me about, I'm looking at this. This email, William Hayden. I thought we discussed previously that it was decided by our management that we would not be able to use you or Larry as panelists authors because of your prior employment at Monsanto. And then this John guy respond, we call that ghostwriting and it's unethical. What's going on in this conversation?
So after IARC came out, Monsanto did something, but they actually have it in written documents. They orchestrated outcry, right? And so they've tried to discredit the agency because it doesn't suit their financial objectives. And what they did is they convened a panel of, quote, independent experts who came together, looked at all the data, and published these robust analysis of the data. The problem is they were written by Monsanto employees and former employees. And what's going on in this email is John Aquavella, who used to work for Monsanto but had left about 10 years ago, they're trying to say, we're not going to put your name on it because we don't want people to see your relationship with our company. And he's saying, you can't do that. That's ghostwriting. That's unethical. I mean, it's really funny because, I mean, Dr. Aquavella is saying, listen, you guys can't actually do that. That's actually unethical. So his name ultimately did end up on the publication. But in those publications, it says in the disclosure, clear as day, that Monsanto didn't review it, didn't write any portions, and that these experts acted independently. Yet we have email after email after email of Bill Hayden's line editing. I mean, we're talking about redlining the document, writing sections of it. It was just complete garbage. It was just a lie.
Wow.
And we showed that to the jury, and they took umbrage with it and awarding $250 million in punitive damages.
Apparently, Bobby had to run. I know he's running around doing a ton of press, so I just want to thank him for coming onto the show. Bobby, keep up the great work out there. It's amazing, and I'm going to continue on with you. I'm glad you're here. We got you in studio, so let's continue on. So all right, we don't want to ghost, right? And so then we have this. We have this Perry report. Tell me what the Perry report is. I'm going to let you just sort of run me through these slides because you have a better sense of where we're going.
Okay, so you got to get some context here. So we talked about that email from Dr. Farmer where she says we haven't done the studies on Roundup, right? Because Roundup is not just glyphosate; it's the formulated product. Well, in the late 1990s, there was a series of publications coming out, and you can actually see it here in the document. They refer to one of them, Lioli from 1998, and these studies were done on the formulated product, right? They were done on Roundup. And Monsanto was freaking out. And so they tried to find an expert who could get rid of the problem. And they hired a guy named Dr. James Perry out of England. And he performed this, and this is the conclusion of his report. He looked at all the data, he looked at all the science, and he concluded that glyphosate is a potential carcinogenic, which means that it in fact can cause DNA and chromosome damage in cells. So Monsanto had tried to hire this guy to sort of fix their problem, and he comes back and says, no, you got a problem.
So I mean, he's a scientist. He's going to look at it, and he just said,
no, he says, you got a problem.
You got a problem.
And what's worse is he goes, listen, the real problem appears to be a synergistic effect between glyphosate and the surfactants and all the other chemicals. And what you need to do is and he listed out all these different studies that Monsanto should do. He said, you have to study the formulated product. That's what you need to focus on. And again, that email from Dr. Farmer, that's from 2009. Right?
Wow.
So this is back in 2000 when they get this
she knew
report.
all of this by the time she's making the statements
Absolutely.
and things she's doing. So he says essentially, you're going to have to study, cross-reference how these things are interacting with each other. We got to start looking at the whole product, not just glyphosate. How did Monsanto respond to that?
So we have this next email, which
Okay.
is just amazing. And so this is from William Heidens, or Bill Heidens. He's a doctor, PhD, toxicologist, and he runs the science program for toxicology for Monsanto. And he says, he goes, we got to take a step back here, right? We need to develop someone who is comfortable with the genotox profile of glyphosate and Roundup. And genotox refers to genotoxicity.
Right.
Genetic damage,
Yeah.
exactly. And who can be influential with regulators and scientific outreach operations when these issues arise. My read is that Perry, this guy who did this report, is not currently such a person, and it would take quite some time and money studies to get him there. We simply aren't going to do the studies that Perry suggests. So this is Monsanto saying, we have an independent scientist telling you got a problem, you got a health problem. And Monsanto is saying, we ain't gonna do that. Are you crazy? I don't wanna see the results. We're not gonna spend the money on that. Get out of here. And what's really obnoxious about this whole situation is that they then buried the report. They never once sent it to the EPA. They never once sent it to any regulator. And in fact, this was something that I pointed out to the jury at trial. I said, this is evidence of malice, right? This is a conscious disregard for the health of people because you have someone telling you have a problem.
You asked the scientist that's the top of their field for their opinion, and they said, you have a problem. You're going to need to do these studies.
Yeah.
And I mean, are these evil people? Who makes a decision like this? Like, we don't care. We don't care that the top scientist just said we're causing cell damage here.
So I would be willing, right, to give them maybe a benefit of the doubt. If they literally just weren't sure about the science, they didn't know what to do with this report, okay. But at this exact time, there's a publication that comes out. It's called Williams, Crows, and Monroe. It's in 2000. It's the exact, just after this report. It's published, and it's supposed to be a full review of the genotoxic profile of glyphosate and Roundup. And these scientists do this full review, and they say it's totally safe, that there's no evidence that it's genotoxic, right? And then they use that study with regulators, they send it, and it's actually cited by the EPA, it's cited by all the authorities, and we actually have documents within Monsanto where they say, oh, this has served us well for what, more than a decade, right? Go to the next document.
Okay, yeah.
We learned something about this, right? So this is an email from 2015, and it's from Dr. Heidens again. And in this email, he's talking about how they're going to deal with these publications. We talked about it earlier about the ghostwriting, how to deal with it. And this is the proposal. He goes, a less expensive, more palatable approach might be to involve experts only for the areas of contention, epidemiology and possibly method of action, depending on what comes out of the IARC meeting. And we ghostwrite the exposure genotox section. So he's literally saying, one way we can do this is to save money, we'll just write it ourselves, right? Put someone else's name on it. But here's the thing that's pretty amazing. An option would be to add some people, add their names to the publication, but we would be keeping the cost down by us doing the writing, and they would just edit and sign their name, so to speak. Recall, that is how we handled Williams, Crows, and Monroe from 2000. So he's saying in this email, we ghost wrote that article in 2000. So
wow.
That's where my benefit of the doubt goes away.
Right.
Not only do they bury the Perry report, they ghost write something saying the exact opposite and then use that to dissuade the authorities that it's safe. I mean, that's fraud, right? That is absolute conscious disregard. That's evil. That's why a jury, when they saw this, said, oh yeah, you're getting punished. And if they continue to do this, they're going to get punished by the next jury and the next one and the next one. And I'm 34 years old. I will try these cases until I'm 90 if I have to. If I have to put Bayer in bankruptcy, I will. But we have the goods here, and it just shows rampant corporate malfeasance.
I mean, they say, I mean, look, I see it on the news, they keep saying it, that there's 800 studies, I've heard this number, and 40 years of safety science that proves. They're coming out and saying, you know, courtrooms, I've even seen this from people that, you know, we see come against us on the vaccine issue, but they're saying, look, courts don't decide whether it's science or not. The science is there. 800 studies prove this stuff is safe. What do you say to that?
It's garbage, right? So the 800 studies that they're talking about are not about whether or not it causes cancer. They're looking at stuff that you have to look at. Does it cause eye irritation? Does it cause your hair to change color? Does it cause skin rashes? You know, all these sort of these volumes of tests that test all these random things. Even endocrine disruption, testing reproductive health. But when it comes to cancer, right, there's only been about 13 animal studies and about 6 or 7 epidemiology studies. And when you actually look at the data, actually look at the science, and I showed this jury every single one of those studies. I walked through them one by one, and they asked really great questions because the jury gets to ask questions. And they were technical questions like, what was the vehicle used on the mouse in this study from 1983? I mean, crazy technical stuff. Stuff that you're like, what? The jury's really paying attention to the science here, right? And we showed all of it. And when you look at actually the studies, almost all of them, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3, are positive. They show a clear association. They show that glyphosate promotes tumors. They show that it creates tumors in mice. It shows that it's causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in humans. And really a powerful study. It's one of the few ones that's been done. It was in South America. And in Colombia and Ecuador, they've been spraying glyphosate and Roundup on the cocoa plants to try to fight off, you know, cocaine production. And what they did is they actually went out and they tested.
Wait, they're using it to kill cocaine.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's sort of like an Agent Orange approach towards let's just wipe out your cash crop.
Exactly. But this is with cocaine.
Right.
But there's people who live there, who are living in these communities, who are literally being doused and sprayed aerially, right, with this chemical. So some scientists went out and they actually tested their blood. They tested their blood. They tested people who weren't sprayed. And what it showed in all of the studies was that the people who were being sprayed had clear, significant destruction of genetic damage across the board. I mean, that was really powerful, real-world evidence that when you get sprayed, you actually get genetic damage. And I think the jury, I think it resonated well with the jury when they looked at all the science. They said, clearly this causes cancer.
I can't even imagine Monsanto thought they were going to win this case. I mean, were they cocky about it? I mean, I'm surprised Bayer bought Monsanto knowing that this case was underway. I mean, what was Monsanto saying to Bayer? I mean, you think about companies buying each other, like, do you have any issues we should know about? We got this one little case with our herbicide that's being sprayed all over the entire planet Earth. They must have said, but we plan on winning that.
You have to wonder what those conversations were like. I mean, I don't get to see them. And if Bayer wants to call me, and maybe I could do a lawsuit against Monsanto for them buying this crappy product, I think I'd be happy to take that on.
Right.
But, you know, Bayer has inherited a nightmare, right? I mean, they have this product that's, you know, everywhere, and we're just beginning to see the health consequences of it, whether it be cancer, whether it be reproductive harms, whether it be endocrine disruption. We're seeing it in vaccines. It's everywhere. And Bayer has purchased something that I don't know if they realized what they were getting themselves into.
What bigger problem can you have? This isn't like a drug where a group that has a certain illness is taking it.
Right.
This is something that every human being, certainly in America, is eating, whether they know it or not, is injecting in their vaccines, is getting in, I'm sure it's in our water sources, I would have to imagine.
It is.
This stuff's in our air. What happens if you've just bought a company that is actually, whether accidental or not, is poisoning every human being on the planet? I mean, the repercussions, it's hard to imagine. All right, so we got a few more slides. Let's I want to fill people, because I think this is fascinating, and if those out there don't, then go on and go get your sound bite on a bumper sticker. But,
yeah.
So what happened here?
All right, so this next one is actually sort of fascinating. It goes directly to Mr. Johnson. And so what happened is he was spraying, and he got cancer, and he gets diagnosed with cancer. The first thing that Mr. Johnson does, he doesn't call a lawyer, right? He calls Monsanto, and he says, listen, I'm worried about spraying this stuff. I'm spraying it on school campuses. I'm worried about the kids. I'm worried about, did it cause my skin cancer?
He spilled some on himself, right?
That's right. He had a couple pretty big exposures.
Like it hit him, and then he recognized a few weeks later, I'm getting some sort of rash.
That's right. He got covered in it with a couple of accidents using the sprayer, actually, that you're seeing on the screen.
Right.
And so he called them, and this is actually from Monsanto's own documents. They actually memorialized the conversation in an email. And it says, he told me he worked for a school district in California, and about 9 months ago had a hose break on a large tank sprayer. This resulted in him becoming soaked to the skin on his face, neck, and head with Ranger Pro, which is just another form of Roundup. He said he was wearing a white exposure suit and even went inside that. A few months after the incident, he noticed a rash on his knee, then on his face, and later on the side of his head. He has changed his laundry detergent, dryer sheets, and used all creams available to him, but nothing seems to help. His entire body is now covered in this now, and doctors are saying it's skin cancer. And so he calls them, and he's frightened. He's just looking for answers. And Monsanto never calls him back. And so he goes on for another year.
I mean, amazing. It's not like he just got lost in a pile, which you can imagine.
Yeah.
They're talking about this guy amongst themselves, but not calling calling Lee back.
That's right. And if you look at the next email, it's his response. Dr. Goldstein, who is the chief medical director for Monsanto, he says, I'll call him. The story's not making any sense to me at all, but he never did. And he goes on to spray it for another year. And what's really important for Mr. Johnson in this case, and the jury heard this, was that it was during this time when he's continuing to spray it that his cancer goes from something that's sort of manageable, although it's a problem, but it's manageable, to a death sentence, right? And the evidence shows that when you apply glyphosate after a cancer has been initiated, it actually promotes it. It actually causes it to spread faster. And the jury heard all this evidence, and it's, I think this was really important to them in saying, you know, how dare you? How dare you not call him back? And it's funny because this actually goes to the next email. So these are actually in good order.
Good,
They
I'm
flow
glad.
nicely. That goes to the next email. So here's Dr. Hyden's, right? This is literally 2 weeks before Mr. Johnson calls him. This is in 2014, and this is in October. And they discovered that IARC is going to look at glyphosate, right? And so this is
what does IARC stand for, just for people who don't know?
Yeah, sure. It's the International Agency for Research on Cancer.
So, I mean, they come from all around the world. These are like sort of luminaries that look at in
right.
cancer research. And I understand it because I did do a whole show about IARC. They actually let Monsanto come. They let everybody
That's
with the
right.
products. Everybody gets to weigh into this giant symposium on, is this product causing cancer or not?
right.
So Monsanto got to make their points. They got to bring their scientists. They heard everything.
That's right.
And came out the other side and said, as Bobby pointed out, in animals definitely causing cancer, in humans most likely it is.
And what's really interesting about IARC is they're truly independent, right? And transparent. So everyone gets to see what everyone's looking at, everyone's talking about. And what's really important about IARC is they don't care about the outcome, right? If it causes cancer, okay. If it doesn't cause cancer, okay.
Right.
They don't care. They're truly independent scientists. You can't say that about the EPA.
Right.
I mean, if the EPA comes out tomorrow and says, okay, it causes cancer, they'd have to acknowledge for 40 years they've been allowing this company to poison the American population.
Right.
And I mean, that's a huge lump to swallow, right?
Right.
And until
we didn't do our job.
Exactly.
We didn't ask enough questions.
Exactly.
We didn't ask for enough transparency.
Exactly.
We are now complicit. I mean, we're dealing with the same thing with vaccines. All these
Exactly.
issues.
CDC
It's the
is
same
the
problem.
same
At a
problem.
certain point, even if you just simply didn't do your job well, how do you admit it?
Exactly.
How do you admit that essentially we've been lying to the public because we've been telling you we're on top of these products and we're making sure that you're safe. And more, I'm under the impression that in America we're less safe than other places. There's countries that are not allowing this stuff being sprayed.
That's right.
I mean,
Sri
there are
Lanka,
countries
it's
smarter
banned.
than us. Right.
It's unbelievable. And to be honest, you know, we've seen these relationships between people in the EPA and Monsanto that are just unseemly, to put it politely. And it really makes you question just how captured this agency is.
Right.
But they'd have to acknowledge it. And so I like to think, you know, I'm optimistic that we have to wait for this generation of scientists that have dug their heels in to leave the EPA, and the new ones are going to come in and go, what are you talking about? It clearly causes cancer. Let's put a label on it. What are we doing? Well, anyway, so this is really interesting. So this email, right, is from Dr. Hyden's, again, the top dog at Monsanto.
Yeah.
And what he's saying is they just learned that that IARC is going to look at glyphosate. So they don't know the results yet.
Right.
They know they're going to look at it. And here's what he says. He goes, we have vulnerability in the area of epidemiology. We have potential vulnerabilities in other areas that IARC will consider: exposure, genotox, and mode of action. And so what he's acknowledging here, and this is 2 weeks before Mr. Johnson calls, is we got a problem. I mean, there's stuff out there that really could be a problem when an independent agency looks at it, and we're scared. We're
Right.
scared of what's going to happen.
Doesn't sound like someone that has 800 studies of science to prove that this stuff's perfectly safe. And Donna Farmer saying, I'd basically put this in my kids' milkshakes.
Exactly.
If I had to. I've studied this molecule, it's perfectly safe. Sure doesn't sound like they feel confident it's perfectly safe.
That's right. And I think it's also important because this is 2 weeks before Mr. Johnson calls. They know they have vulnerabilities in the data. They have a man calling him, scared, and they don't even call him back. They don't tell him about these vulnerabilities. That's unconscionable.
It is.
It's just unacceptable.
It is. And how many people go through to think that Lee went through that step to call the company. So many people just go on their merry way. I mean, to be so conscious as to, let me just reach out to this company and see. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of extra superhuman, really. So few people would do that. Who does that,
I
right?
know, it's unbelievable.
And you don't give the guy the time of day.
That's unbelievable. And just so you know, he actually called back a second time.
Wow.
He called a second time in March, just after the IARC had come out. He had never heard of the IARC, but he calls him, and you know what they did? They didn't call him back again.
Wow.
And when we talked to Dr. Goldstein, we said, sir, why did you call him back? He goes, well, I don't remember. But when we said, what would you have said to him if you had called him? And he said, I kid you not, I would have told him to keep using it. And that's what he said. And I think that really upset the jury because it shows just an absolute
arrogance.
Unbelievable. Just the amount of, we don't care about you, we just want to make money. And it's just pervasive through the company.
Wow.
So incidentally, this next document is actually pretty funny. So one of the things that came up in the trial was tobacco, right? This is the same playbook. And one of the big defenders of tobacco, to the very end, like when everybody said, hey, listen, this causes lung cancer, come on, the science is there, was the American Council on Science and Health. And what they did is they kept saying that there's confounders. Oh, we see the risk in the data, but it's actually being caused by some other thing.
Right.
And that's literally the same exact
Smokers
argument.
drink too. It could be the alcohol. Smokers do this, right.
Yeah, they don't exercise enough.
Right.
All the different things that they throw into the mix, right? And Monsanto did the exact same thing. They were saying it's confounded by other pesticide exposures. It's confounded by, farming generally causes cancer. They came up with all these nonsense, dirt, crap confounded. And so I had the epidemiologist on the stand, and I had her admit that that's how they fought. The tobacco companies fought it back in the day. And then later on, this document comes up. And this is an email from Dr. Goldstein, right? And this is after IARC, and they're just desperate. And he actually says before this, he goes, we don't have a lot of supporters and can't afford to lose the few we have, right? So they're talking about how no one's backing them up in the scientific community. And he's trying to get money to be given to the ACSH, which is the American Council on Science and Health. And he says right here, you will not get a better value for your dollar than ACSH. I mean, that just tells you how they view science.
Let's keep donating to these guys.
Yeah. We can buy the science, and you're going to get a better bang for your buck from these corrupt sons of bitches. I mean, that's, sorry, part of my language.
No, that's okay.
I mean, that's what happened.
There's a lot more could be said.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's pretty interesting. And actually, if you go on to the next email, they talk about this. And there's some people within Monsanto who are like, maybe we shouldn't be working with these guys. I just did a quick Google search of Monsanto. It confirms why on many fronts a science-based organization, ACSH, which consistently debunks the junk science attacks of activists, is needed. Let's find a way to secure Monsanto's renewed and continued funding of ACSH's ongoing work to provide a rational voice of scientific reason to the public. I mean, in addition to tobacco, by the way, the ACSH were the ones who fought lead poisoning in children.
Why does this thing even exist? Who reads this? I mean, at what point does some group like this exist anymore? I mean, if you are, it's unbelievable. And things that you've been proven wrong so many times. You've been on the wrong side of scientific history. Who would ever even listen to these people again?
But I mean, you could say the same thing about Monsanto.
Yeah.
They made DDT. They made Agent Orange. They made PCBs. They have been personally responsible for almost all the major carcinogens in our society.
Wow.
How do they have any credibility? And for what it's worth, that came through a little bit at the trial. We had jury selection, right? We brought in 120 different people to come in and potential jurors. We only need 12. But we were worried that there might be some bad sentiments against Monsanto. And we lost almost half the jury because person after person stood up and said, sir, I cannot be in this jury. I believe that corporation is evil. I believe they're behind
Like my dad. My dad would not have been going to be like, nope, sorry. fact, my dad would probably say, "Oh, I'd love to be a part of this." No, I think they're great.
Some of them were so bad, we actually had to take them to a back room so they
let them vent.
Yeah,
just have it out. Let it go. Let it go.
And I'd be like, Your Honor, this juror's great. I think they should be on the jury. But obviously, you know, the jury that we did get, though, was impartial. They all said I could be impartial. They're fair. And Monsanto deserves an impartial jury.
Sure, everyone does.
But they were unanimous. I mean, they didn't believe Monsanto's nonsense for 1 second.
Wow. I mean, what an amazing job, Brent. And so where does this leave us now? I mean, I guess, you know, I know that they're going to appeal this. I mean, it's a huge verdict. It's now going to go to appeal. This thing's going to get dragged out. While that's going to appeal, do the other cases start up, though? We don't wait. Do we have to wait for that appeals process, or are you going to start firing new cases in? How does that work?
We have a new trial starting on October 22nd in St. Louis, so it's in Monsanto's hometown. And a lot of people are freaking out. They're like, "Oh my God, it's Monsanto's hometown." They're hated more than anywhere else in their own town. It tells you a lot about a corporation that where they're headquartered resents them. Right. And that tells you something.
Are you concerned at all that you have basically put all your cards on the table? You've laid it all out now. Now they've seen it. Now they know what they're dealing with. Have you used up all the science? Is there anywhere else left to go?
No, I mean, what we have here is about 10% of what we had. I mean, we had to rush Mr. Johnson's case to trial. He was dying, and so we needed to get his verdict and the appeal done as fast as we possibly could. There are hundreds of other documents, way more damning than just these, that show just absolute, definitive misconduct by Monsanto. And so this case, as it moves forward, is going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. I don't know what Monsanto's thinking. If we won here, we're going to win anywhere. And we're going to take them out with these lawsuits as long as it takes until they do the right thing. And the right thing...
Yeah, what is the right thing? Where does this go? I mean, is there any mercy clause in, like, mercy, we lose, we cannot pay everyone in the world? What happens? Is there something that shuts this valve off?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that has to happen. I mean, the first step is to just warn, right? I mean, people still smoke cigarettes, but they do that with their eyes open. They know what risks they're taking on. Right. People can make that choice. I'm not saying we ban glyphosate. I'm saying you let people make the choice for themselves. Step one is warn. But then the second step is sitting down, and I'm willing to sit down with them whenever they're ready, to really work out how do we do right by all these people who are sick. Right. And how do we create a fund, for example, to make sure that the research gets done moving forward, to make sure that people who do have problems that appear in the future have a way of being compensated and having their health care and taken care of. I mean, there is a way through this if you take responsibility. But until they do, I'm going to put my foot on their throat and I'm going to take them to court. And I will do that and do that until they cry uncle, because there really is no other way. I don't want Monsanto or Bayer to go out of business. I really don't. But I do want them to take responsibility. And if we can get them to the table and they can do the right thing, and as I said to this jury, we actually just might change the world. And so that's kind of what this lawsuit's about. And Mr. Johnson, with his courage, gave me a chance to really, and my team, to really do this. And it's kind of, hopefully we can really make a difference.
Brent, you're a new personal hero of mine. I mean it. A lot of people know that I was either going to be a theater guy or a journalist guy or law. I'm always sort of envious when I get to be around lawyers. I love how you think, and I love what you're doing here. It's world-changing. It is truly, truly amazing. And there is no doubt, as Bobby said, that we have the right guy in front of this mission. So keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for taking the time. It's really an honor to have you here. So good luck. Keep us posted, and we'll certainly keep talking about it.